Hello and welcome to video 3 of the series on the UIkit frontend framework. Today we're going to talk about the responsive grid and how you can use it to lay out your sites. What we're trying to do is to build a fictional feature list, something like this, that actually responds to our device's width, so that on tablets we would have something like this, and on phones we would have a look like this. But we're going to start with something a lot simpler, just one box. Let's have a look at the markup that we're using to do this. I've prepared some markup and I'm using Sublime Text here to actually work through the code today. Don't get confused when you'll see some auto-completion boxes popping up like this. Oops. This is the UIkit autocomplete plugin, which is available for the Sublime Text editor. I recommend using that, it's really helpful. Now, let's have a look at what we're including here. We're including the UIkit CSS, of course, and then including one additional CSS file, which just styles this one container here, which I'll come to in a bit. We'll include jQuery and the UIkit CSS file, because the UIkit JavaScript file, sorry, because the UIkit JavaScript requires jQuery to be present. Now, let's look at the markup. I've added one container around the whole content that we're going to build. I could have used the UIkit container. The class is called UK-container. But that one actually includes more features for responsive behavior. So when we resize our window, we would see some margin changes and so on. And I don't want to confuse you with that in this just grid example. So what I've added here in the CSS file is just we're going to limit the container to a maximum width, make it centered on the screen, and add some padding. All right. Now we already have one container box here, like you've seen in the last video, the UK panel with the UK panel box modifier, so that it looks like a box with a background in the slide border. All right, so what do we want to do? We want to have a list of features. So we'll start with some semantic markup. We'll have a UL list, and we'll have, let's start with 3 list elements, like 3 features. And each of those features should be the box that we have here. So, oops. This is feature 1. Feature 2, feature 3, and I'll remove that panel that I prepared here. Oops, all the time. Let's have a look at what that looks like. Okay, well, that doesn't look too good. Of course, we have the UL styling here, the default UL styling. We don't want that. But what we want is the grid. So we'll add, on our parent container here, we'll add the UK grid class. And actually, we could have done this with a div and here another div, but because we actually want to have a list of features, it makes sense. And the grid, I'll just refresh here, and the grid class actually makes sense on several markup. It's not limited to divs or ULs. You can use whatever makes sense in your markup. All right, so what we see here is that we have the grid class has collapsed all those margins to be totally collapsed, but actually the width of this panel is not quite clear. Right now it's limited to by the actual content inside, but of course we want to control the width of our columns that we have here. So let's start by saying, okay, the first feature will be 1/3. And you see here in the autocompletion, that's really helpful. You have the UK width class with whatever ratio you want. So the first column should be 1/3. And we'll just do the same on those other 2 columns as well. Okay, let's have a quick look. That looks pretty nice already. And yeah, that looks really nice actually. But we want to have even more containers than this. So I'll just duplicate that last one here. So that's 4, 5, 6. Okay. This page is in Norwegian. Would you like to translate it? Nope, thanks. So, it still works in being in several columns, but as you can see here, when the fourth container flows in the next row, there's no margin anymore. And in some cases this is desirable, but in our case it's not, because we want to have an equal gutter width between rows and columns. So what I'm going to show you now is actually how to use UIkit's JavaScript components, because as you've seen so far, we have these UK-classes in CSS, and you know that when you build your own JavaScript, you can select your containers, whatever you want. You can use CSS classes and so on. What I like in UIkit is that whenever you want to use JavaScript on your containers, you use a data attribute, and that one is prefixed as well. So everything named data-uk- comes from UIkit. So we'll use a so-called helper here for the UK grid component. The UK grid margin attribute. We can actually add some attributes here, like some helpers, so some JavaScript helpers take some parameters, but this one can be empty. So let's have a quick look. And there we go. It's still not Norwegian. Come on. Never translate this site. Okay. Yeah, so this looks quite nice, right? We have an equal padding between those columns, and I'll make it smaller. Okay, we'll want to change this, how this looks, but still, I don't know if you can see it, but at one point here, oh yeah, at one point here, the margin between the columns and rows becomes smaller. See, that's the breakpoint. This is actually a nice feature of the grid. You just have to be aware of that, because, oops, depending on the style, there's a, okay, what's happening here, I don't know. Depending on the style, there's a margin which is defined for large screens, a margin which is defined for smaller screens, and for medium screens in between. By default, it takes whatever the current screen size is, but you can also modify that to say create grid margin, no, sorry, grid gutter, I'm stupid, UK grid small. Oh yeah, I think there's UK grid large, a UK grid medium, and UK grid small. Let's try small to see the biggest difference. Okay, and then we, are you kidding me? So now we resize this and the gutter stays the same. We just have to be aware of that. Now, what is not really nice about the current markup is that we have this UK width class on every column here, right? On every element. Of course this works, and this gives us the possibility to have unequal width, right? We could have 1/3 here, 2/3 there, then in the next row 2/3 and so on. But actually in this case, when all our elements are the same width, we have a simpler possibility. We can just do have the UK grid be of the class UK grid width 1/3, and now all child elements will be the same width. Oh, Norwegian, I'll just leave it like that. So this is quite nice, because now we can also immediately say, oh well, let's try 1/6, right? So now all of them are equal width and we have 6 elements per row. But this gets quite crowded when we go to medium-sized screens or even small screens. So what do? We use the responsive behavior. UIkit is mobile first, which means that if we have the UK grid width class, this applies to small screens, medium screens, and large screens. But now we can also, so this applies to all screens, we can also say, okay, on medium screens, so UK grid width for medium screens, please have them be 1/3. There we go. Okay, apparently this already is a medium screen. My old 13-inch MacBook apparently is a medium screen. All right, so we won't see any change here, which is okay. But now onto even smaller screens. UK grid width. Oh, sorry. Of course, I explained it's mobile first. So of course, what we want to apply to well, small screens, medium screens, and large screens is this: have them be well, let's say 1/2. 1/2 width. Then on medium screens we'll have 1/3, and on large screens, UK grid width large, we'll have 1/6. Okay, now it works. I'm sorry for that. So large screens we have 1/6. On medium-sized screens we have 1/3 width, and on small screens we'll have 1/2. So that looks quite nice. Alright, that's what I wanted to show you about the responsive grid. There are actually even more features with the responsive grid that you should check out. For example, right now all our content is the same length, right? So all boxes are the same dimensions, but imagine this box here has one sentence more. Then that panel will be a bit longer, and you might not want that, in particular if you have like an equal distributed grid like this. There's a UK grid margin, UK grid match JavaScript helper as well, where you can tell it which classes to make the same height. So in this case, we could tell it to make all panels be in one row, to make all panels in one row be the same height. So that's a nice feature. And another thing I want to mention is the markup ordering. For example, you might want to style a grid in a way that one column is here and one column is there, but from more like an content aware or markup aware perspective, you might want to have certain elements, certain headlines higher up in your markup. With UIkit, this is actually possible. So even though you would have column 1, column 2, column 3 here, they could be the other way around in the markup. And the classes for that are called UK grid pull, I think. Just check out the documentation. This is the core documentation and the grid component. So there you see all the width classes, example, responsive width, the different gutters that I explained. Of course, you can nest the grid and the source ordering. Yeah, see the UK pull classes. So that's quite nice, and there are even more features that I haven't mentioned today. So I hope you have a nice overview of what the grid component is able to do, and that you see that's a really powerful tool, because you can use it for small things like you can even have like a nested grid in here and have like an image to the left and then content to the right and so on, but also for your large layouting needs. Thanks for listening, and as always, I'm keen to hear your feedback.